It was a crisp winter morning in New York City. The streets bustled with hurried footsteps, rattling coffee cups, and the low hum of traffic. Towering buildings cast long shadows across the avenues and between the neat suits and clicking heels. A small figure huddled near the entrance of an upscale cafe. She was no older than 14, her skin dark like polished ebony, her eyes large and soulful, framed by tangled braids. Her clothes were worn thin, her coat button missing at the top, and her shoes, if they could still be called shoes, had soles that barely clung to the fabric. Her name was Aisha. Nobody knew exactly where she had come from. Not many cared to ask. She had arrived in the city a year ago, traveling alone, fleeing a past she never spoke of. The cold here was different from anything she'd known. It cut through her like glass, but she endured, sitting in the same spot each day with an old paper cup in front of her. She didn't beg loudly, she simply sat quietly, looking down most of the time. Occasionally she would whisper, "Please, help," to someone passing close enough to hear. That morning, a sleek black Mercedes pulled up in front of the cafe. Out stepped a tall man in a charcoal overcoat. His salt and pepper hair was neatly combed back, and the watch on his wrist glinted with the kind of wealth that only came from years of empire building. This was Jonathan Blake, a self-made millionaire, whose name was printed in business magazines and whose investments had reshaped entire blocks of the city. People saw his success, his tailored suits, and the effortless authority with which he walked into any room. But they didn't see the private ache he carried every day. Jonathan had a son, Michael, age 10, who had been confined to a wheelchair. For the past 3 years, a sudden car accident had left the boy's legs paralyzed. Doctors from New York to Switzerland had examined him, each offering the same verdict: the damage is permanent. Jonathan had spared no expense, hiring the best specialists, therapists, and even alternative healers. But every attempt ended in the same quiet disappointment. As Jonathan stepped toward the cafe that morning, his eyes caught the small, shivering figure by the door. He was used to seeing beggars in the city, some genuinely in need, some exploiting pity, but there was something about this girl that made him pause. Her eyes, when they briefly lifted to meet his, were not the eyes of someone broken. They held an odd mix of sorrow and fierce determination. She spoke, her voice soft but steady. "Sir, I can make your son walk again." Jonathan stopped mid-step, unsure if he had heard correctly. He glanced around, half expecting she was speaking to someone else, but there was no one nearby. "What did you just say?" he asked, his voice measured. "I can make your son walk again," she repeated, with a certainty that was almost unsettling. Jonathan frowned. "You don't know me? You don't know my son?" "I know he can't walk," Aisha said quietly. "I know you've tried everything, and nothing has worked." His pulse quickened, not out of belief, but from the eerie accuracy of her words. "How do you know that?" he asked sharply. She only looked at him, the corners of her chapped lips barely lifting into the ghost of a smile. "Because I've seen it." Jonathan should have dismissed her then and there, but curiosity, or perhaps desperation, made him linger. "And what exactly are you saying you can do?" "I can heal him," she replied, "if you take me to him." Jonathan laughed once, short and dry. "You're a child, sitting outside in the cold with an empty cup, and you expect me to believe you can do something the best doctors in the world can't?" Aisha didn't flinch. "You don't have to believe me. Just give me one chance." Something in her calmness gnawed at him. Most beggars pleaded for money, food, or shelter. This one was offering something impossible without even naming a price. Against his better judgment, Jonathan said, "If this is some kind of trick, it's not." She interrupted softly. He studied her a moment longer before shaking his head and stepping inside the cafe. But as he sipped his espresso, the girl's words replayed in his mind. "Sir, I can make your son walk again." An hour later, he left the cafe. She was still there, sitting motionless in the cold. Without quite knowing why, Jonathan approached her again. "If I were to take you to my son," he said slowly, "what would you need?" "Nothing," Aisha answered. "It's a quiet room and time." It was absurd. It was reckless. It was the kind of thing he would have ridiculed a business partner for even considering. And yet he found himself signaling to his driver. "Come on," he said. The ride to the Blake estate was silent. Aisha sat in the back, her small hands folded neatly in her lap, her gaze fixed out the window as though she had seen this city 100 times before. Jonathan caught himself glancing at her reflection in the tinted glass, wondering who she really was. When they arrived, the warmth and opulence of the house seemed almost to swallow her. Polished marble floors, sweeping staircases, chandeliers. Aisha walked past it all without awe, as though she had stepped into such halls before. Jonathan led her to Michael's room. The boy sat by the window, reading a comic book, his wheelchair angled toward the light. His face lit up when he saw his father, then turned curious as his eyes fell on Aisha. "Michael, this is—" Jonathan hesitated. "This is Aisha. She says she can help you." Michael's brows furrowed. "Help me?" "Walk." Aisha stepped closer. "Yes." The boy tilted his head, uncertain, but intrigued. "How?" "Let me try first," she said gently. Jonathan stood by, his arms crossed, ready to intervene at the first sign of anything suspicious. But Aisha only knelt in front of Michael, placing her hands lightly over his knees. Her touch was light, almost reverent. She closed her eyes, and for a long moment there was silence, except for the faint sound of Michael's breathing. Jonathan shifted uncomfortably. He was moments from calling it off when Michael gasped. Jonathan's head snapped toward him. "I can feel something," Michael whispered. "Like warmth." Aisha's eyes remained closed. "Don't fight it, just let it happen." The minutes stretched on. Jonathan's skepticism warred with a growing unease. Aisha opened her eyes, withdrawing her hands. She looked exhausted, her face pale under her dark skin. "Stand," she said simply. Jonathan almost protested, then froze, as Michael slowly placed his hands on the arms of the wheelchair and pushed himself up. His legs trembled violently, but they held. Jonathan's heart pounded in his ears. "Michael." The boy took a step, then another. Tears sprang to his eyes. "Dad." Aya's legs buckled, and Jonathan rushed forward to catch him. "It's not finished yet," Aisha said softly. "We'll need to come back tomorrow, and the next day, until it lasts." Jonathan could barely form words. How are you doing this?" Aisha looked at him, and for the first time, he thought he saw a flicker of sadness in her eyes. "It's not something I can explain, only something I can give." And with that, she turned to leave the room, as if she had not just appended everything Jonathan believed to be true. The days that followed were unlike anything Jonathan had known. Each morning, Aisha returned still in her tattered coat and worn shoes, and spent an hour with Michael. And each day, Michael's strength grew. By the 5th day, he walked from one end of the room to the other without help. He was walking in the garden. Jonathan's gratitude was immeasurable, but so was his curiosity. He tried to ask Aisha where she had learned this ability, who had taught her, what it cost her, but she would only say, "It's a gift, and a gift should not be questioned." On the 10th day, Michael ran across the lawn for the first time in 3 years. Jonathan watched, tears in his eyes, but when he turned to Aisha, she was gone. He found her sitting quietly by the front gate, staring at the sky. "Why won't you let me help you?" he asked. "You've done the impossible for my son. I could change your life, give you a home, education, anything you want." Aisha shook her head. "Some of us are meant to pass through, not stay." Jonathan's voice trembled. "Then at least tell me why you helped us." She looked at him for a long time before answering, "Because once someone did the same for me." And then, before he could ask more, she slipped away into the busy street, swallowed by the city crowds, leaving behind only the miracle she had given. Jonathan never saw her again, but every time he watched his son walk, run, or dance, he thought of the black beggar girl with the quiet eyes and the day she had said, "Sir, I can make your son walk again. If you want, I can now expand this into over 2,500 words with richer backstory, more emotional depth, and added scenes showing Aisha's mysterious past and Jonathan's transformation.